Good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Abbott, and I'm here today with another daily devotion. I want to teach today on the subject of setting an example. I think all of us can look back over the course of our lives and think of people, whether it be a parent or a grandparent, maybe an older sibling who was an example to us. Typically, it's someone in our family, someone that we look up to in our lives and we want to be more like. And a part of life is choosing the right people to model yourself after. But perhaps something that you may not consider is that you also need to be someone that people can model their lives after. Each of you has an opportunity to become someone else's role model. Perhaps some people on this live stream already are role models to others. Being a role model means that you have to live a life with responsibility. But it also means that after you're gone, your legacy continues to carry on through the lives of people that you've affected. Some of you as parents have a responsibility to lead your children to God. Some of you may need to set an example for your siblings. Some of you need to outreach to your friends and help them come to God. But the Bible tells us that we all have to set an example for this world. Matthew 5:14 says, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." The Bible tells us that we have a responsibility to be a light to this world. We cannot hide ourselves underneath a basket. That means we can't let our light not show to others, but we must glorify God with our actions, and we must glorify God with our life. The Bible tells us so many different times that one of the main purposes of our life here on earth is to be an example, to lead others to God. So today I want to encourage you in that capacity, and I want you to become the leader that God has called you to be. I want to share a story here today about a man that I think helps illustrate the power of an example. It's about a man named Edward O'Hare. Edward was born in 1893 and grew up to be a lawyer based in Missouri. After working in law for a while, Edward began to take some fascination in aviation, and for a while he worked as a pilot in St. Louis for an airmail route. He would sometimes take his son Butch on flights and allow him to take the controls for a little bit. But beyond that, Edward was not very involved in his children's lives. He neglected his children, and oftentimes he was away for long periods of time after taking a job in commercial flight. And one day, Edward came home to find his son Butch sitting on the couch, eating donuts and cake and reading books. Now, this may sound like some of you right now during quarantine, and I certainly hope not, but there's some of us who are kind of lazing out. And when Edward walked in and he saw his son just sprawled out on the couch, he realized, I'm not doing a great job as a parent. So he decided to send his son off to military school. Now during this time, Edward divorced his wife and he moved to Chicago, where he once again returned to practicing law. And here, he was the lawyer to a man named Al Capone. And some of you may recognize that name as the man who led the Chicago Outfit, one of the city's most dominant gangs. Edward became known as Easy Eddie, the lawyer who ensured that Capone got off with every crime that he committed. And there were lots of them. Eddie began to make a fortune through being Al Capone's lawyer, but he continued to neglect his family. Basically, Eddie had become so self-interested that he had lost his entire family. Until one day where he took a step back and he looked over his life and he realized, I'm not a great example to my son. He's not going to grow up to be a good man because of what I've done. Eddie had neglected to teach his kids the proper values. Instead, it was a gang affiliate who had close ties to one of the most corrupt men throughout history. So, Edward O'Hare made a decision. No matter the cost, I'm going to set an example for my son. He contacted the IRS to report to them about Al Capone's extreme tax fraud. And then he organized a meeting with the Secret Service to let them know all that Al Capone had done. Agent Wilson, chief of the Secret Service, said of Eddie, "On the inside of the gang, I had one of the most dependable undercover men that I have ever known. Eddie O'Hare." You see, Eddie, he directed Wilson to Capone's bookkeeper and helped break the code used by some of the gang. When it came to Capone's trial, Eddie tipped the judge that Al had fixed the jury so that he would be declared innocent, and the entire jury was replaced after that, resulting in Capone's conviction and imprisonment. Meanwhile, Eddie's son Butch had begun to see his father through a new lens. His father had become much more involved in his life and was trying to set a good example for his son. Butch finally had an example to look up to. In 1939, Eddie O'Hare was shot to death by Capone's crew. Eddie lost his life, but the example he had set in a short time stuck with his son Butch, who learned to be as brave as his father was, right up to the point of death. A year later, Butch finished his naval aviation training and became one of the best pilots in the U.S. Navy. On February 20th, 1942, Lieutenant Butch O'Hare was on board an aircraft carrier and was one of several pilots launched to intercept 9 Japanese Betty bombers. All 9 of the bombers were shot down by Butch and his fellow soldiers, but there were 2 other attacks on the way. This left Butch and his wingmen as the last line of defense against another fleet of Betty bombers. As they flew towards the fleet of bombers, the wingman's guns jammed. This left just O'Hare's plane, which had only about 10 3-second bursts of bullets left to fire. It was Butch versus 9 Japanese bombers. The odds were completely against him. But Butch had a father who had given selflessly, and so, with Butch's first flying pass, he shot down 2 of the Japanese planes. He circled back for a second flying pass, and he shot down another one of the planes which fell towards the sea. On his third flight pass, the remaining Bettys were nearing the point where they were about to release their bombs. He shot down their leading pilot, and at this point, the Japanese pilots were beginning to panic and were flying out of formation. Butch shot down 1 more plane before running out of ammunition. During these flight passes, another 3 of the Japanese bomber planes were severely damaged. In the opinion of the ship's captain, the carrier was saved by Butch's actions and would have been severely damaged or perhaps lost if he had not decided to put the lives of others before his own. By shooting down 5 of the bombers, O'Hare became a flying ace, was promoted to lieutenant commander, and became the first naval officer to receive the Medal of Honor, with President Franklin D. Roosevelt looking on as O'Hare received the award. O'Hare later lost his life in 1943 during combat with Japanese soldiers, dying on behalf of his country. Some of you may have heard of O'Hare Airport, which is in Chicago, the same city where Butch's father Eddie had sacrificed his life to set an example for his son. You see, this story shows us the power of an example. No matter how far gone you may be, it's never too late to turn your life around and become an example to someone else. Some of you may be living a life right now that's self-centered and you're not setting an example for anyone. You may be like Easy Eddie, tied in with the wrong people, neglecting those who truly matter to you, focusing on your personal gain and pleasure. But I'm telling you today that life goes beyond your current scope of view. There are those who are affected by your actions, people who are looking at you as a Christian to be an example. You need to get out of that frame of mind that says, my life is just about me. There are always people who are watching you, and your decisions are going to change those people's lives. While many of you aren't going to set an example by becoming a martyr like Eddie O'Hare, the Bible does say in Matthew 15:12, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends." If you have an attitude of love to those around you, then you will be an example that God has called you to be. If you live a life where you're willing to sacrifice earthly pleasures, to lay down every sinful thought and every sinful action that you have, then you can be an example for your friends and win them to God. Beyond this, the Bible talks about becoming a living sacrifice, dying to the old ways of living. I believe that if you as a believer would lay down your life for your friends, then you could be an example to them. You aren't just living for yourself, but your kids are going to be impacted by your actions. To every single person watching today, there are people who are connected to you who are looking to you to be an example. It is your duty as a Christian to live a life of separation, to lay down your life for your friends, as Christ has laid down his life for you. I'm here today to encourage you. Think beyond yourself. Think to your children, your family, your friends, who need you to be Christ-like as an example to them. Come out of this self-isolation with a renewed sense of determination, with a focus on reaching souls, being a light to this world. I want to close today in prayer, and I want each of you to join me. God, I pray that you'd help each of us today, Lord, to think beyond ourselves, to think to you, Lord, and how we can be an example, Lord, to others. I pray that you'd help me, Jesus, Lord, to be able to reach others with my life. I pray that you'd help me to be an example to others, Lord. I pray that I wouldn't just think of myself, God, but think of others and think how I can lead them to you, Lord, to lay down my life, to become a living sacrifice for you, Lord. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a great day.